Welcome to Tech Simplified, and my name is Sly Gittins. And today we're continuing the Woman in Tech series. And I think I might have the best guest of all. Her name is Emily. She's about to share her story. She's about to tell all about what she got going on in the field of tech and how she's continued to be a dynamic lady, just not a woman in tech, a phenomenal lady in tech. So without any further ado, Emily, would you give us a quick introduction about your background for my audience?
Oh, Sly, thank you so much. And can you just follow me around and kind of hype me up throughout the workday? That would be amazing, amazing. I got to say, talent recognizes talent. And I think everything that you are doing professionally and all of these passion projects that you have is really inspiring. And so I'm glad we were able to connect in this way. So I lead a portion of the professional services team at a company called Stripe. You may have heard of it, maybe you haven't. It's one of the giants in the fintech space. And so I've been there it's coming up on a year, and I lead a portion of the team that works with our largest enterprise customers to help them implement, launch, and optimize the Stripe product to help meet their business objectives. But I've actually been in tech for 11 years or so. Feels like longer, feels like shorter, some days though too. And so I've always been in tech positions, but across different verticals. So I've worked in construction, healthcare, and now of course the fintech side of it. And prior to getting into tech, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I think like a lot of young people, a lot of older people too, I knew that I wanted to make a difference. Just like the bleeding heart, the young person stereotype. But I wasn't ready to even go to college. I spent a few years, just kind of working different jobs. I went to community college for a few years. I worked for the Forest Service for a while, and I got really passionate about technology. I think around the time when, the iPhone first came out, it's just, you could see that, wow, something really big is changing here. And of course it was. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of that. And so I worked my way up into a four-year college. I was at community college for a really long time, eventually transferred into UC Berkeley and finished out there. And then really right to work in the tech sector. Kind of cutting my teeth as a project manager, learned a lot of different disciplines, customer success, sales, product development, Q&A, and eventually found my niche really within professional services. A few years into my career, I actually took a big pivot and I started working for a startup, which a lot of people do. I was like employee number 21, very early days startup. They hadn't even raised their Series A. And because of my interest and experience in doing implementations, I was tasked with setting up this function at that company. And that was really the biggest pivot, I think, for me professionally, where I was given the opportunity to lead, given the opportunity to build a team, build a function, and then stick with it over a 4.5-year period. So in that time, I learned how to hire, I learned how to manage people, I learned a lot about how to scale, and I learned a lot about how to prepare a company for really having that big global presence and thinking really, really big with something in front of you that may seem kind of small. And so that's I think really where my growth happened. And so that led into, having different leadership and management positions within that field at various companies. And then I think the reason you and I connected most recently is I put a lot of what I've learned the hard way, specifically about the art of people management, into a book so that other people didn't have to necessarily learn things the hard way the way that I did.
That's awesome. Yeah. And your book is fantastic. And we're going to dive into that so you can share a little bit more gems about it and where can we get it from? So I guess question for you is, you talked a little bit about your educational path already. You talked about your journey. What would you tell yourself when you were younger? Like, what advice were you giving when you first got into your career? What type of things will you tell you not to focus on, or where you should spend your interest at? And the reason why I'm asking this is a lot of people who watch this show are either in that transitionary period or in the beginning of their careers. Or even if they are in their careers, they might be thinking like, should I still be here?
I would say that a couple of things. One is if you have any interest at all, even a sliver of an interest, learn some technical skills. I mean, the divide in wealth and income earning opportunities for people that have technical skills versus not is so massive. And it's one of those things that it is actually harder to pick it up, I think, later in life. Not to say that you can't, but the earlier that you can really build a technical foundation, I think the better you're going to set yourself up. Now, that does not mean you have to go and be a software engineer, but knowing enough to be a little bit dangerous about some technical skills can be a huge differentiator. So I wish that I had done that more. I thought of myself as like an arts and humanities person. And that's really very limiting, especially when we think about women and minorities and thinking, oh, just because I'm a really great writer or I care a lot about the arts doesn't mean you can't, technical fields aren't accessible and available to you. So that was one. And I think two is the people that you work for and surround yourself with professionally really matter so much in carving you out as a person more than the actual work that you do. So I think people, when they're young, they think about, oh, what do I want to do? What do I want my day-to-day to look like? What type of job titles do I want to have? Honestly, look how much job titles have even changed in the past 30 years with the rise of the internet. Don't worry about the job title that you have. Worry about the type of mentors that you have around yourself. Worry about the business challenges and the character development aspects. The roles and the titles and the jobs will fall into place. And in fact, it's wise to not specialize too early. Learn as many different kind of trades as you can. Stay a generalist as long as you can, but being around people that really inspire you and can carve you out as a professional, that is going to set you up for long-term success.
Yeah, I think to echo that part too is I think the people you do surround yourself is going to give you experiences that you might not need to read in a book, right? Because you can spend a lot of time reading a book, but I found is I could accelerate that with good mentors or good peers because you learn a lot just from your peers, right? Also, and I think you also talked about is learning a little bit of tech, and the earlier you do it, the easier it is. Like, lucky for me, I got lucky and we had a computer at home, and my parents didn't know how to use it, but I learned how to use it myself, and that's probably been the best thing that's helped me in my career because, as you said, the wealth gap from having this tech background and my peers that don't, you can see it's pretty substantial. And the cool thing about it is tech became so mature now. It's so many elements. Even though you're in tech, you might not be doing technical things. You could be a finance person in tech, accountant in tech, right? So I think that's also something good to know. And that's kind of why I've created this channel to show that tech can be simple and it can be easy to get into, whether you're a minority, a woman, or whoever, right? It's available to all of us. So that kind of goes right into my next question is, what is your passion?
So many things. But I think where I feel the most excited about right now is, well, I guess it's really twofold. One is getting the next generation of great people managers into their spots and preparing them both to rise into those spots and supporting them once they are there. I know that there's a lot of challenges in tech and there's a lot of challenges in the world right now. We've got pandemics and there's a recession and there's war and all of those things. And where I feel like I can make a difference is helping people who aren't well represented get into those first line of management roles. It is such a big change to go from an individual contributor into a manager. And I think that's where we start to see really, again, another big division in wealth and access and opportunity is people not raising their hands and then not being supported. And we're really seeing a shift now. I mean, us millennials, we were the generation nobody really understood, and we have a lot of feelings, and we, eat avocado toast and, whatever else. But the scary thing is, depending on who you ask, or the exciting thing is, depending on who you ask, is we're the ones that are actually everyone's boss now. Like, we are the biggest generation that is that first time level manager. And so how do we bring those values but into the workplace, but also still really be successful in corporate America in a hyper capitalist society? I think that it's possible, and I want to elevate this group of people to just be the best that they can and have a really satisfying career. And then the second area of passion is, this is actually one of the reasons why I joined Stripe. I think that what is happening in terms of the global financial system evolving into something that is much more equitable and gives much more opportunity to people all across the world and in all different walks of life. We're seeing a really big change, and it's hard to tell when you're in it, but I think the global financial system is going to be unrecognizable in a couple decades from now. And I'm really excited to be part of it by being and working in the fintech industry. And I think it's just, we're seeing a big change in influence and power and wealth. And so a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that is happening.
So I guess you said a lot there, and I think it was fantastic. I want to touch on your book, right? Because I know that's a core of your passion, and helping millennials be an M1. And that speaks to me directly, because that's kind of the transition I'm making. Is I made my manager know, like, hey, I want to go into management. These are the things I've been doing, the books I've been reading, the mentors that I align myself, the training I've been taking, and I'm ready to do this, right? So I'm having that same conversation. So can you talk a little bit more about, how do you see people using your book and taking that information to be better managers?
So I think there's two things. One is by reading my book, and people will get a better sense, which, by the way, my publicist makes me mention it. I'm not good at mentioning it. It is called Make Me the Boss, and It's available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. It came out in January 2022. And so it's a really good kind of inside baseball of what it is really like day to day to be a people manager. And when you're on the other side of it, when you're an individual contributor, sometimes you don't see the heartache that happens behind the scenes, or recognize that, your manager is going to make mistakes and have bad days and not necessarily have, the kind of glory that you might think about it. So first, I think it can help people understand, like, is that something I actually really want to do? And for a lot of people, I think it's a no. Right. And we force people into management positions simply because they think that's the next step. And in reality, that's not going to be good for anybody. But then once people are there, when you go from individual contributor to a manager, the first 6 months of it they can be very destabilizing. Your whole identity and your circle of influence shifts overnight, but anytime you try something new, you're not going to be good at it right away. So a new manager is probably somebody that was kicking ass as an individual contributor, and all of a sudden as a manager, you're probably not going to be that good at it. And it takes time. It takes time. And so you have to really give yourself some grace. But I give people a number of checklists, cheat sheets, and ways of making that adjustment to best set themselves up for hopefully a long career in management and leadership. But certainly a guide to, what do I do my first day, my first week? What do I do when the inevitable things come across my desk that I've never dealt with before? Someone quits, there's an emergency, there's an escalation. I got to go talk to HR. I got to go hire somebody. It's like, you don't actually really know how to do those things. And so my book is like that survival guide, but also ushers people into, a new power dynamic, thinking about the relationships in the workplace. When you go from individual contributor to manager, you got to kind of like be a little bit aloof from any friendships you might have in the workplace, because you got to step away from that a little bit. And so I can feel lonely. What do you do when your friends start hitting you up for jobs once they realize you're a hiring manager? How do you handle that with grace? What does that mean for that first hiring decision you make? How do you make that in a way that is equitable, that asserts your authority, but also really sets you up to build your team? So that's really what the book is for, and how I've written it, and I'm pretty proud of it. So thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic. And for those out, if you're on the fence, the link is going to be in the show notes. If you're listening to this, and if you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be in the description. So go buy that book, because it's fantastic. I was able to get a copy, started reading it, and it's definitely truly worth the read. And on that same vein, when we're trying to make that transition from my early career to mid careers, there are a few books. We're going to have the audience get your books. Make Me the Boss is going to be on our reading list, right? Is there any other books that you recommend maybe a first-time manager should read, or just books that really spoke to you when you was rising up the ranks?
So I have read a lot of business books, and I think that there's a couple categories of books actually that I would recommend. One is, I do think as a people manager, you don't need to be an expert in everything. In fact, you probably shouldn't be, because then, if you're the smartest person in the room and you're at the top, that's scary, right? Like, don't you hire people that are smarter than you. But you should really study your craft and study your industry. And so it's important to stay fresh, especially if you're in a technical field, about emerging technologies or industry trends or just interesting things happening in your space. So in addition to personal development books like mine, I think it's important to stay academically and intellectually challenged by what's happening in your space. So whether it's cloud computing or hospitality or logistics or architecture, read about what's happening. Read about famous people that are making a wave in your industry. And then the second is, I think that there are leadership lessons very far outside of tech and very far outside of the modern world and the modern industry. So, read about how did historical figures build alliances to, deal with geopolitical battles. I mean, I'm not saying that we should all look to Winston Churchill for leadership lessons, but there's something there, right? And so don't just limit yourself to modern contemporary leaders. I think expanding and learning from other leadership lessons in history, even if you reject those, even if you think, wow, this person is so far out of touch and this has, I totally disagree with their tactics. That can help you refine your leadership style further. So I would say those are kind of the three categories of books to enrich yourself as you're going through the transition.
That's great. That's something I started to do. I watched a lot of documentaries, like in Franklin D. Roosevelt, and then how Churchill, they formed the alliance. And that's how, information, they can realize they can control the world by having conversations with the world to know what's going on, right? Also, when you look at different, like Franklin, I listen I listen to a lot of there's different leaders, like from modern leaders or like artists. Like I can find stuff from my artists and the way they run their business, like the people at the labels who run their business. Or sometimes I listen to Frederick Douglass if I want to go look for that. Or even like I find other areas, like I like a lot of poetry, and there's a lot of stuff that you can learn in there from how did someone market before there was internet, right? Word of mouth,
Absolutely.
Right? Why is Einstein remembered, but the other people who were there with him, who was just as smart probably, who was not remembered, like the marketing, right? What separates Elon Musk? Is he that much smarter than Bill Gates or someone else? Or is he just a master marketer? Or what is he doing, right, to grab this attention while people there, But you're right. I think that's something, is to be a little bit eclectic with the information that you are absorbing, because that's one thing I've been starting to do. I love self-help books. I love business books. I read it all day. But now my wife was in education, so I started reading some of her books, then her psychology books, because I realized, well, hold on, if I'm in marketing or I'm tech or I'm in sales, that's all psychology, right? So I probably should learn that. So it's just, even now, this with my daughter, what she's reading, like, it's funny. I remember I was working at a startup, and it was similar. As that, I think I was like employee number 30 or something, and it's 5 months in. I'm like, man, I'm stressed out, working 110 hours. Just had my daughter. I'm like, not enjoying the job. My manager and I are still eye to eye, but he can kind of tell I'm not enjoying the job. So I'm like, and then he was like, we had that talk. When you have that talk with your manager, it's probably not good. You're going to have that talk. So I'm like, I'm not the person to crit. I'm going to figure it out, right? I always figure it out. But then I went home. I read a book. It was called Put Me in the Zoo. It's a little kid's book, right? And this animal wants to go in the zoo. right? But he shows all the tricks he can do, right? That's how it goes. And then he meets these kids, like, look all the tricks I can do and everything. And then by the end of the story, it said, you shouldn't be in the zoo. We agree with that. You should be in the circus, right? I'm like, hold on. Why is this little kid's book talking to me right now, right? And it's the same thing. The skills that I was using in that role as a director of product marketing wasn't the skills that I love to use. So of course I'm having friction internally because this is not what I want to be doing. I just, then anyway, that helping me accelerate my decision and ultimately led for me to be where I'm at today, where I'm having a lot more fun and growing into the role, right? So I can't speak enough volumes enough as finding that information that is maybe not too normal for your day-to-day. Even now, I remember I subscribed to something called Agenda, and it's about boardroom conversations. Half of the stuff I don't understand what they're talking about from a tech person, the different things they make in from diversity or how they managing budgets, right? It's so different from what I'm going to read from in cloud computing, right? Like how to fix the server, right? Right. So it's for me, it's been helping me think like, all right, I'm a manager and I got to adhere to my board of directors, right? And my management, what conversations are they even having? How can, from my role, because it's not going to be as impactful from where I'm at, right? Make my team understand that, right? And how do we push forward those goals for the company, right? So yeah, I disagree with what you said. I like how you bucket that information. So we get into the end of this, Emily, and I hate it because that means we ought to stop talking. It's been a phenomenal conversation, I feel like. So one thing I like to do is, because this is great what we've been talking about, what I like about these conversations that I have is just the beginning, it's just the start. So if my audience wants to contact you, to learn more about your book, connect with you, learn from you, where should they go?
Absolutely. So the best source is going to be my website. It's emilytsitrian.com. And for those of you listening, you have to look at the show notes probably to see how to spell my last name. It's a little bit tricky. But from my website, you can see links to sign up for a newsletter, which I'm working on developing. I actually have my own podcast where I have conversations with various people managers myself and links to go and buy my book. So website is the best, but please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, Twitter, on Instagram, on the main social media platforms as well.
Fantastic. Well, until next time, Sly Gittins and Emily are out. Peace.
Woo. Thank you.